recording this for CTSB. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Town of Lenox Master Plan. This is our second community meeting on this sunny Saturday morning. We'll do a quick round of introductions. I'm Gwen Miller. I'm the Land Use Director and Town Planner in Lenox. And I have been guided in this master plan update by our wonderful steering committee, Mary Beth Mitz, Pam Kieber, who is on the call now, Kate McNulty-Vaughn, Olga Weiss, Suki Werman, Rob Murray, Elliot Morse, Adam Davis, Alan Burrows, both of Shakespeare and Company, Julie Monteleone, and Isabella Williams, who were both seniors. They have since graduated, but they were at Lenox Memorial Middle High School. And we have been aided by the wonderful help from the Berkshire Regional Planning Commission, Phil Arnold and Tom Matusko, who is the executive director. If you haven't gotten a chance yet to look at our draft master plan, the whole document minus the appendix is available on our website. If you click this link here, you can go look at the whole document. We're welcoming comments or questions at this time, and then kind of where we are in the, well, I'll get to that. Where we are in the process is the steering committee and staff have been working on this plan for about 2 years now, and we're seeking public input. And then the steering committee will take public input received at these kind of community meetings, and they'll update the draft document to create a second iteration that will be posted for public comment for about 2 weeks. And then we'll take that to the planning board and the Board of Selectmen for their adoption. And just a brief note about the steering committee. It's composed of representatives from various elected and appointed boards and committees. So Board of Selectmen, Planning Board, Historical Commission, Environmental Committee, the Chamber of Commerce and Finance Committee, and Shakespeare and Company represents kind of the cultural institutions in Lenox. So we'll move right along. This morning, we're going to go over why you have a master plan and what it is. What were kind of some key high-level findings in the plan? What is our overall process? What's the vision? We have an overall vision and then a vision for each kind of topical chapter, an overview of the plan, and quickly looking at goals, objectives, and actions. We will be taking a break kind of after each section to seek your comments or answer any questions people have. So for the reason we have a master plan, it's a little different than a strategic plan. It's different than a site plan or a neighborhood plan. It really has the community identify where are you today in 2021? What are the key challenges, kind of key characteristics, key opportunities in Lenox, and where does the community want to go? It's like from soup to nuts, thinking from your municipal facilities, what needs to be fixed, what needs to be replaced in the next 5, 10, 20 years. Also, what areas need better environmental protection, or what areas kind of need a little pick-me-up in terms of investment or property stabilization. And so it's really a helpful document when making kind of broad decisions, when you're thinking about a whole neighborhood or a landscape scale change or impact. Or if you're making a zoning board decision, can you turn to your master plan and say, well, the community really voiced support for a project like this in our 2021 master plan. So it's a very useful decision-making tool. Many federal and state grant programs ask that a community has a current and up-to-date master plan. The process hopefully builds and identifies consensus. So, which is really important in decision making, that people are kind of starting on common ground and agree about basic values that are guiding decisions made for the community or by the community. And it shows how a community will get to its vision and make sure all of the goals, objectives, and actions are achieved in a reasonable time frame, and that there's a way to get it all done. And in Massachusetts, a master plan is guided by a section of Mass General Law. The reference is on the bottom of the slide. My toolbar is hiding it, but but it basically highlights what chapters you need to have in a master plan, what each chapter should contain, and that who should adopt the master plan, and they identify the planning board. In some states, a master plan is actually, it's much more regulatory, and the town or county has to pass like local policies or regulations that implement and are in harmony with the master plan. Massachusetts is not what we call a plan state. So it's more of an advisory or guiding document. So with this master plan, it kicked off in January 2019. The funding was provided by a town meeting appropriation for $50,000. And the steering committee was appointed by the Board of Selectmen, and staff worked with core assessment teams who were identified stakeholders who have an expertise or passion or work very closely with the element. So we had an economic development core assessment team, a planning or a land use core assessment team, open space and rec. Really all of the chapters had these core assessment teams. And one benefit of this model was there were a few core assessment team groups that convened, and they were like, wow, we've never all been at the same table at the same time before having this kind of conversation. So that was a really valuable outcome of that early planning process. And they really helped inform the key findings and the goals, objectives, and actions that we'll talk about in a minute. And really from July 2019 till the end of the year, the consultant prepared draft chapters, and these would go back to the core assessment team and the steering committee for review and additional input. And from February 2020 to about now, the steering committee was reviewing and providing input and incorporating kind of their touch to the plan document.
Hey, Gwen, can I jump in, or is that welcome, or you want to just?
No, please jump in, Pam.
I just wanted to note that, it's been 2 years, but the work on the plan did come to a sort of screeching halt in the earlier days of COVID. I want to say we sort of paused everything while everybody waited for some of the dust to settle. And, what I think we were able to do, or what afterwards, is that we were able to take all the work that was done on the plan already. A lot of it was done, or the draft plan, and then circle back to each chapter and say, okay, now we've had COVID-19. How are we going to amend some of these recommendations? Because the landscape has changed economically and otherwise. So, part of the reason it's taken this long is because of COVID, but the planning documents now do reference, some starter thoughts as to what we'll do given COVID.
Thank you, Pam. That's a really good thing to note. We did take a COVID hiatus just because we weren't sure how we could have a safe and kind of meaningful public process in person, particularly in the early days of the pandemic, and then even through the summer, and then kind of the spike in cases and all of that. This fall and early winter kind of scuttled us again. So we pivoted and are now doing everything virtually. But when I go over our overview of each chapter, I'll point out how we've incorporated the pandemic into the So now we're in our public meeting phase. These first two meetings, we had one on Monday and one this morning. It's really to give folks an overview and a heads up, like, hey, we're doing this master plan, it's almost done. You don't want to create it in a vacuum. We really want your input and your feedback. And then the goal is by June to have the final plan brought both to the planning board and the board of selectmen for their adoption. And by adopting the plan, they're endorsing the plan and saying, we agree with what's in the plan and we support the plan, and we want to help achieve the plan into the future, and we will support efforts toward that goal. So the plan has, the components of a typical document of its length, like an executive summary, table of contents, an introduction. But really the meat of the plan are these individual chapters, which talk about demographics, which is more like a snapshot in time of who lives in Lenox, who are we planning for, how has that changed since 1999, land use, economic development, open space and recreation, housing, historical and cultural resources, services and facilities, transportation and circulation, and implementation. And I'm going to go over like what each chapter has in it and why in a minute as we go through each one. And the chapters are broken down so you have an overview, which kind of like welcomes you and shows you where we are. There's a vision, and that's what the town is aspiring to. Priority topics and priority goals, context and background, goals, objectives, and actions. And so I think what's important to note too is our upcoming meetings, and I'll have a slide with those dates coming up. Those are really where we'll be seeking out your priorities and making sure we've identified the correct priority topics and priority goals. Like, did we miss anything? Do you agree with the priorities? What are your priorities? So a quick snapshot in time. Again, the most recent update to the master plan was in 1999. And before that, the town had a 1968 master plan, and there's a copy available at the library if you ever want to check it out. So really some 4 key characteristics that have kind of remained the same. Lenox has maintained a very stable population of around 5,000. The peak population was in 1980, and it was about, I want to say 6,000. It's maintained high quality municipal services. It's known for its abundant cultural, natural, recreational resources, and it's had a strong financial footing, and it really seeks to maintain that into the future. So in 1999, if you look at the demographic chapter in our master plan, it really notes a stable aging population with death rate higher than birth rate. It notes our seasonal influx of residents and visitors. And it says the population is going to it will grow slowly, but it will probably remain the same. And it also notes, Lenox is not known, much like the Berkshires, it's not really known for its diversity. So in 2021, nothing has changed that much. We still have a stable aging population. We estimate a seasonal increase in population of 54%. That's based on our water and sewer flows in peak season. Population from the Massachusetts, the University of Massachusetts Donahue Institute, they're actually projecting a 10% population decline in Lenox. And that's fairly consistent with the rest of the region. And kind of the broader New England region as well, just because of the aging, the baby boomer population and those older. And we're not seeing the same kind of in-migration and family growth that other areas of the country are seeing. and not very diverse still in terms of race or ethnicity. Income has increased, so the number of households in Lenox who are making above, I want to say 200,000, that's increased greatly since 1999. Economic sectors are largely the same. Though it's interesting when you look at the 1999 plan, a lot of the large regional employers who many Lenox residents worked for, they're no longer here. KB Toy, some of the paper companies, they're no longer open or in the area. The 1999 plan referenced the very same kind of housing challenges that we have in Lenox today, the aging housing stock, kind of the limited inventory in deed-restricted affordable units for both seniors and kind of family-aged households. Our municipal facilities that were old in 1999, well, now they're almost 30 years older. So that adds kind of an additional challenge to how we think about them and how we plan proactively for their long-term sustainability and use to the community. And the goals and visions, they haven't changed dramatically either. So in 1999, the community vision was identified as guiding the development, enhancement, and conservation of the town to create a more diverse yet tightly woven community that pridefully sustains its rich cultural base and excellent amenities as it meets the economic and social needs of present and future residents. And so in 2021, the overall vision is that the town of Lenox seeks to preserve its blend of rural character and urban amenities while becoming a more diverse population that is inclusive of first homeowners, younger people, and families. And that was really in response to thinking about, how has the town changed since 1999? Really, how does it want to look like and feel in the long-term future, considering where we are today? So we'll just jump into land use. So a land use section in a master plan really looks at what is the current development pattern in the community? What are the key land use patterns? Are there specific areas or neighborhoods in the community that have been identified as priority or preferred sites for new development or redevelopment? And are there areas that have been identified as not wanting to see any change? So really thinking about that, and I'll go through some maps too, and kind of, I'm not going to read verbatim what's on the slide, but I'll just give you kind of a high level key finding from this planning effort. And really in Lenox, the land use itself has not changed dramatically over time. If you look, the state data shows us the land use pattern from 2005, and that's based on aerial survey. And if you think about what neighborhoods or where in Lenox has there been change in land use, it hasn't been dramatic. And really the future land use map closely mirrors kind of the existing land use pattern. And so the land use goal, and also I think it's important to note in terms of land use in Lenox, we have kind of two things beyond our control on the horizon that will likely impact land use, and that's obviously climate change. And it's also, this is more in our control, but the rest of river effort that will take place along the Housatonic River and how that will impact kind of that river valley landscape in East Lenox and specific neighborhoods such as Lenoxdale, and how we make sure that both climate change and something like rest of river, they don't make decision-making or work to achieve local goals. They don't make them come to a screeching halt, but they let us leverage our assets and opportunities to keep moving in the direction we want to move.
Hey, Gwen, can I jump in here on land use? I don't know if you want us to do that or not.
Sure, Pam, go ahead.
I think you presented this super well. I'm on the planning board and we worked hard on some of these goals. And I think that on this one, what we were trying to mirror back, reflect what we heard from citizens in the background work was that the people of Lenox really value, we love Lenox. We love its landscape, we love its historical resources, we love its open space and recreation. And we very much want, citizens very much want to protect what we have. At the same time, citizens recognize that we need to, continue to have a solid economy. But that, and so that the key here, the sweet spot is to balance those things in the way we use land and do our zoning and such. How is it that we get, how are we going to be able to ensure that we, have and keep this treasure of natural resources and quality of life, yet still move forward? So that's, I think,
Thank you, Pam.
Kind of a pivotal thing we discussed in land use.
Yeah, I think too, the planning board did a very comprehensive survey of all. So the town has a bevy of existing plan documents ranging from 1998 to 2018. And the planning board went through all of them and really picked out the different actions and goals in all of those plans and started to kind of rank them in priorities and think about which have already been accomplished and which still need some shepherding forward. So in part of this chapter 2 looks at the development pattern in Lenox to date, and it's really been guided by the natural topography of the community, and also obviously our zoning. And the zoning in Lenox has not changed greatly over time either. I think our earliest zoning map I've seen is from 1940 or 1941. And if you look at that until current times, the commercial districts and residential areas have really, that's always been the zoning pattern in the community. And again, here's the current land use map I referenced earlier. Just looking at where we have our commercial activity, it's really focused in our 2 village neighborhoods, Lenoxdale and the village center, and then along Route 7 and Route 20, and kind of the red you're seeing dispersed in the residential neighborhoods. Those are mostly our great estates, which are a special zoning category. And you'll see in the future land use map, they're part of our special use districts. And so here's the future land use map. And the way this was developed, so the Berkshires have their own master plan from 2012. It's the Sustainable Berkshires Plan. And they developed a framework for helping communities identify future land use, kind of looking at what's there now, what's developable, what are priority protection areas, what does local zoning kind of encourage or allow. And so they came up with this pattern of land use for the future. The dark green are really important natural areas that we don't want to mess with. It's really important to, when possible, and you really should work toward it, is to preserve these large contiguous swaths of habitat and forest and open space. It's really important for, say, our water resources, where the town gets most of its drinking water. It's very important for ecological diversity, and it's really important for climate resilience. It both helps sink carbon, and it also helps a community and landscape be more resilient to the impacts of climate change. The red is our commercial corridor. There's still quite a bit of developable area along Route 7. So in the next meetings, we'll get more into, well, where, like, okay, what kind of use are you comfortable with seeing more of or different in the commercial neighborhoods? The paler green are kind of residential conservation neighborhoods. We don't really want to see these change. There's just some ways that you can better connect them to the open space and natural resources within and near the residential neighborhoods, and ways to think about making new development more sensitive and environmentally friendly, and better blending in with the scenic natural landscape. The orange are kind of, they're more dense neighborhoods, like surrounding commercial or mixed use hubs. And the pink pocket here is really the compact, traditional, dense village center. And the purple here is our kind of industrial corridor in Lenox. We only have one industrial zone, and it really reflects where the old paper mills and glassworks were. Lennoxdale kind of sprung up around the river for the hydropower and the connectivity along the railroad. So we're thinking about how can you, in the 21st century, how do you reuse these old industrial sites and buildings, but also how can you fit, if people still need places to live in 2021, Lennoxdale has this great legacy of kind of worker housing. So it has a higher density of housing than some of our other neighborhoods. Can you mimic that in new development in a way that's very sensitive and fits in with the existing land use pattern? So that's what we're thinking about with the future land use map. I'm not sure if Pam, you had any comments on that.
No, I like it. Looks good.
Okay. And so I think that's really one of the key findings, like Pam said. It's like Lenox doesn't want to see dramatic change. It has its priority areas for new development or redevelopment picked out. And it's just thinking about where things can fit in a way that won't impact natural resources, that won't stretch municipal services or resources, and that can fit in with the existing density and kind of what existing neighborhoods already look and feel like. Oh, and another important point is the land use chapter really looks at a variety. So it's divided the community up into, I want to say 8 distinct neighborhoods. And this has changed from the 1999 plan as well. It's more based on how our assessors categorize neighborhoods when they're evaluating property and determining values. So it's a useful framework because it's really based on kind of geographic area, the natural features that kind of form these neighborhood boundaries, and then the density and amenities that are within each neighborhood. So we have Purple Eastover, Laurel Lake, Lenox Village, Lennoxdale, Tanglewood, Pleasant Valley, and New Lenox. And so the chapter goes through each neighborhood and kind of says what's happening there today and how do we want to, what will happen there in the future. And I think, yeah, so, and again, it really focuses on any new development or redevelopment happening kind of in the village center where possible, in Lennoxdale, and on Route 7 and Route 20 up till the Pittsfield line. And it really tries to, in our primarily residential areas, it thinks about how you better connect the neighborhoods to and from open space or cultural attractions, and how there are some service gaps in certain residential neighborhoods. Like there are still parts of Lenox not served by town sewer. And thinking about, does it make sense to ever extend sewer further along East Street, for example? So it looks at that. And we'll dive into, oh yeah, let me just take a pause. Are there any comments or questions about kind of the land use in Lenox and the master plan? Oof. Okie dokie, we will move on. I'm like being blinded by the sun. So looking at economic development, again, I'm not going to read from each slide verbatim, but I think, oh, I'm sorry. And let me, before I leave land use, this is a good time just to point out. So in land use, we thought about how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted land use. And for each chapter, we kind of said, what challenges have been highlighted or exacerbated by the pandemic? Which do we think will probably go away with the pandemic? And what are indicators that we should keep an eye on to make sure the pandemic, that the impacts from it aren't bad for the community in the long term? And so in land use, we're really thinking about, are we seeing an uptick in new residential building permits? And another thing too, that through, again, looking at our water and sewer use, we can kind of keep an eye on how many of our seasonal residences have become year-round residences, because that puts greater pressure on our municipal resources. And so how are we pivoting toward that? And it looks like we do have some questions. I don't know, Phil, do you want to read them?
It might be easier if I just promote, I think.
Oh, okay.
But I can read as well.
Yeah, whatever.
So,
whatever's easiest.
Aaron had a question regarding population decrease projection of 10%. Does this hold true in spite of increased virtual work from home and proposed train transit to and from Boston?
Yeah, so that's actually a really good point, and that is something that I'll get into through economic development, is that even though the projection says we're likely to lose population, it's very possible that could be wrong, and I think one of the goals of the master plan is to not necessarily lose population, but to keep it stable. And the possibility of remote and virtual work is really promising for Lenox and the Berkshires. And yeah, and I will say Lenox already has a much higher percentage of workers, so members of the workforce who do work from home. I think we're 2 or 3 times higher than the state average in that indicator. So people already do take advantage of our relative proximity to places like New York and Boston, even Albany and Springfield, and the transit that is available, and are able to live in Lenox and either have their own business from home or work for some larger companies, which is pretty cool. And so that actually gets into one of the priority topics of economic development. So obviously in Lenox, I don't think this is news to anybody, tourism is really the town's bread and butter, kind of the supporting jobs and businesses in Lenox. Really, they're primarily composed of the activities that could fit into tourism, like hospitality, entertainment, and that includes lodging, dining. Also, services are an important component of that. But the number 2 priority topic identified by the Economic Development Core Assessment Team and reiterated by the steering committee has been this idea of economic diversification, and thinking about, so like a challenge of having an economy so reliant on tourism is the seasonality. And it's thinking about, in the master plan, you can look at some of the data that we have. But if you look at unemployment, for instance, in Lenox, and this is true to the region, but there's such a fluctuation in unemployment between the peak season and then say the winter months. And so is there a way to become kind of more resilient to things like the pandemic? If you look at some of the impacts from the pandemic on economic development, just the unemployment figures compared to past years have been very, very high because all of our, many of our cultural anchors and our typical tourism attractions, so think about Tanglewood, Shakespeare and Company, Canyon Ranch, they were either forced to close for a period of time, or thinking about Kripalu, where they laid off like 500 people. They've either had to close or they had to reduce their programming like very dramatically and pivot to more of a remote program. And now I think, Pam, this was really your chapter, so I'll let you jump in too. And how do we market the town to say, look, Lenox is a great place to live. You can get high-speed internet here. It's easy to get to by bus or by train. Like, come here and work remotely, or come relocate your business here, you know. How can the town pivot towards that more? With the priority goals really being, we need to help support and revive tourism, particularly in light of the pandemic, to help restore overall economic growth, keep marketing the high quality of life that Lenox hosts, and really diversifying the local economy to make sure there are well-paying jobs for people of a variety of backgrounds and educational levels. And it's a place that the kids who are going to like the excellent Lenox schools, that when they do go to college or if they pursue a trade, that there are jobs here in Lenox for them to stay for or come back for. And I'll say too, in economic development, the tourism industry helps the town generate on average like an extra $2 million per year. And that is really important in helping the town maintain its very strong financial footing, providing its excellent services, and being able to help market and promote the community as such a great place to live and work. And it's really helped keep the tax rate for residents and businesses relatively low. Which is pretty, like if you look at the tax rate, it's remarkable for when you consider kind of the number of services and the quality of services that are offered in Lenox. And so Pam, if you had anything to add.
I think you did a great job, and sort of building on what Erin asked about. Really all three of these things are very interconnected. I mean, you could say that many people live here in the Berkshires and in Lenox in particular, not per se because of tourism, but because of all the cultural and natural and historic amenities that we have. So the core assessment team felt, this is a reality and it can be viewed as a real strength. In terms of economic diversification, I'd say you also set that one up nicely. But another factor is that tourism jobs don't necessarily pay well. And what we did hear from people is that they'd love to have more jobs in the Berkshires for their kids to be able to afford to come back here and live. So if you work in the tourism economy, you may not necessarily be able to afford a house in Lenox. So with economic diversification, we were kind of also thinking, yes, have something that's more have more jobs that are resilient against highs and lows in the tourism economy, but also better paying jobs. And that would be inclusive of remote workers working from home, people who are able to move up here and work not only on their own, but maybe bring their own small businesses to Lenox and build new companies for the future. And we have examples of that even in the past 20 years. And then, new residents, again, goes hand in hand with that. So these all become very interlinked. And I'd say, honestly, when you look across the whole breadth of the master plan at all 8 topical areas, one of the benefits of doing this process is that you begin to see how all of these different areas in town and in town planning can be interlinked, so that, you know, like the right hand knows what the left hand is doing, and that potentially different groups of people working on different things can pull together and work on, you know, the most high priority topics for the town. And I think that's what we're hoping to happen in this entire master plan.
Great, thank you, Pam. Oops. All right, and so what it goes hand in hand with economic development and land use. We have open space and recreation. So this chapter is really intended to look at what are our existing open space and recreation areas. So those include areas of really, oh, sorry. Are there any questions or comments about economic development?
And I'd also love to hear from Mary Beth. Mary Beth is one of our, is our select board member representative, and she probably has some interesting things to say about this as well.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking this would dovetail nicely with the housing slide, and I was going to save my comments for the housing portion. So I think I'll jump in at that point, if that kind of goes with the flow of things. And okay. I recognize that there's a comment from someone that says that, you know, all of these economic development things do dovetail right into the housing issues. And that if we wanted younger families to be able to move to Lenox, or, you know, people within the hospitality sector to be able to live closer to where they work, there is the need for a greater mix of housing options. Oh, great. So we're going to jump ahead.
Let's just jump to housing.
Sure, let's do that.
Yeah. So I agree, housing and economic development are very closely intertwined. And I think this is one thing we've been hearing locally for some time, and now it's gaining more attention at the regional level too. It's really, how do the Berkshires and smaller, like Lenox, smaller communities such as Lenox, how do you create a housing stock that supports a diverse economy? We know in Lenox that there are large employers, and there are also smaller mom and pop businesses who struggle to find and retain kind of qualified, quality employees. And one of the challenges is that housing that is sustainable based on the locally available wages and income. So we hear this from really a range of businesses. And we know that there are large regional employers who have prospective employees and current employees who would love to live in Lenox or communities like Lenox, and really struggle to find housing that meets their income level and their lifestyle stage. So thinking about senior housing, Lenox has about, I want to say 54, it has a number of units that are deed restricted affordable senior housing, and some of these are owned by the housing authority, and there's a property that is also privately owned and managed. So thinking, if the population is aging, do we need more senior housing? Where should it be? But also there's kind of, with the baby boomer population, it's thinking about people are growing older, but they're aging more healthfully than they have in the past. So they're going to be able, and they're going to want to live in their own homes for a longer period of time, most likely. So what kind of housing is available for an older resident who they're no longer raising a family of 3, their house that they have been in for the last 20 or 30 years, it might be too big for them. It might be too expensive to maintain or heat, just all of the responsibilities that come with homeownership. How can you help that person or that household? How do they transition into a more livable, healthy housing opportunity in the community that they are a part of? So that's one aspect of senior housing. If you've ever looked, finding like a single floor housing opportunity, really in Lenox or the region, they go very quickly because so many people are saying, well, we want to age in place and we need kind of single floor accessibility in our next housing opportunity. And thinking about rental housing, our rental stock is very old for the most part. And it's really dependent, without a deed restriction on it, it's really dependent on the landlords being able to kind of keep rents affordable and at a monthly cost that is attainable for the local workforce. And I think too, Mary Beth and Pam can get into this, but kind of the advent of short-term rentals and how those are marketed and have become kind of more widely accepted in the norm, how does that impact rental stock in the future? Access to ownership is a big deal too. Currently in Lenox, there are no affordable ownership opportunities. And when I say affordable, we're talking about houses, like home ownership opportunities that have a deed restriction or some kind of subsidy on them that makes sure that just because you bought the house for a price affordable to you, next time you sell it, it will be affordable to that next household who comes in. We're making sure the available housing stock, it's not always being flipped. So that was one concern too with the pandemic, certainly, is as more people are finding it desirable and they're able to relocate from an urban area and come to Lenox full time, is that a housing opportunity that a legacy resident or someone in the workforce currently that they're not having access to anymore? And certainly the pandemic also highlighted issues of housing security. And so it's helping people stay in their homes, whether it's a rental unit or a home ownership unit, and making sure that the units they're in are safe and healthy as well. So the town really hopes to increase the availability of housing affordable for young first-time homebuyers, again, trying to help keep the population stable and diverse, and really being inclusive to households of all ages, but especially these younger families who will come and put their roots down and be a part of the community. And then really increasing the supply of mixed income housing options that are in or near our existing commercial areas and villages. And so that is in line with the land use goals. And it would also help support the local economy. And I'm happy to have Mary Beth or Pam, both of you, jump in here.
Yeah, I'm just going to add that it would be really great to have more public participation when we have the breakout sessions.
Agreed.
Because what we're really interested in is having people attend the session, like the housing breakout session, and help us to determine where you'd like to see this new, mixed income housing options go. We're going to have the zoning map available and, try to point out land that is developable within Lenox, and to have those discussions about, where you'd like to see residential home ownership options go, where you'd like to see mixed income rental options go. And so these are really important opportunities for the public to get involved.
Thank you. Yes, and so the next, so we have a comment from Veronica Fenton saying Pam's comment about planning for young people having jobs and living here supports the need for affordable rental housing for young people, which we don't really have now. And Liz Goodman is asking about when the breakout meetings will be. So I'm just gonna, we do have a slide for that. Oops, where's my PowerPoint control? I'll just, here's the next meeting schedule. If folks just wanna take a screenshot or something in case you have to jump off early. But housing will be on March 1st. But we'll also get into it a little bit during the land use conversation on February 8th, so Monday.
Hey, Gwen, I just want to jump in on housing and say,
Okay.
you know, if you put this all ties very much back to the vision for Lenox as well. I think, again, what all of the people working on the master plan kept hearing from townspeople as we talked about our different areas and did the research was that one of the things that makes Lenox so wonderful is that it has real community and that its vitality comes from having people of all sorts live in our town. And in particular, we heard a lot from people saying, we want more kids, we want more kids, we miss the kids running around in the streets. So a lot of these areas, housing included, I think were kind of, and Mary Beth, you can comment, you know, kept that in mind the whole time. And this is sort of the vision for our master plan. How do we make our, and did we get it right? We want to know, Liz and Aaron and others. You know, how does Lenox continue to take steps to become welcoming to people from all walks of life?
Exactly. It's really important to us that, you know, like Pam said, that we maintain the vision of Lenox as a wonderful place to raise a family, as a place that you can afford to raise a family. And I think affordability has been slipping through our fingers in the last several years. Certainly, the pandemic has certainly shined a light on that. And honestly, there hasn't been much new housing stock produced since about 1990. It's been very, very minimal. And a lot of that just has to do with the cost of construction in New England.
And I think too, the housing stock that has been built since 1990 has been a luxury units.
Right, very costly. And so, you know, we want there to be modest housing for people who live and work in Lenox, and for seniors who want to get out of, you know, possibly larger houses, as you mentioned before, Gwen, and just live in a smaller, more modest setting, but to stay in Lenox. So we do see the need for increased housing production.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll just go back kind of quickly for open space and recreation. So I'd say a big kind of, not finding, but a sentiment that became very loud and clear during this planning effort to date has really been that Lenox is an open space and recreation hub. It has a plethora of opportunities, whether you know about them or not, they're here. And so this ties hand in hand, certainly with land use. Which areas does the town want to further protect? Which areas aren't protected and we want to protect? Which areas are hosting recreation? And that can range from hiking, fishing, canoeing, mountain biking. Where do we really want to promote that use? Where can we do a better job managing it to make sure it's good for people and the environment? And how can we better promote those resources and opportunities? And really thinking about that. And also in terms of economic development, it's promoting the resources and helping market them and getting people familiar with all of the great spaces and places we have in the community. So whether you're a longtime resident or a visitor just for the weekend, like, you know where to get, how you get to Kennedy Park, how you can explore Post Farm, that you can park at the pedestrian bridge in Lennoxdale and like walk to October Mountain State Forest. And that's also thinking in the long term about the future of the Housatonic River in that kind of river valley. Is how do we connect people to the natural resources of the community and really make every place a place where people are, it's safe and healthy and enjoyable to be, and really connect with the landscape and the environment. And thinking about the town for a long time has wanted to build some kind of shared use path that would be safe for cyclists and walkers, and be usable all year round. So thinking about where that fits in, and I think the most intuitive place is really along the river. So how we can fit that in with the future remediation efforts, and also with our transportation planning. So that's open space and recreation in a nutshell. And really, we have a fairly, well, actually, it's not current, it's expired, so we have to update it very soon. We have a fairly current but expired open space and recreation plan. And the state requires you to update these periodically, and having a current plan basically makes you eligible for 2 or 3 special state funding opportunities that are competitive and hard to get. But this is our open space and rec plan map from 2015. And it's pretty remarkable if you look at it. The goals in that plan, there's been a lot of headway in. If you think about the activity on along kind of the Undermountain Road neighborhood, Parsons Marsh, kind of through BNRC and private landowners, there's been a lot of effort to further protect this core habitat. Kind of, we mentioned in this plan, looking at core habitat along Route 7, that's kind of just at the edge of the commercial zone area, and thinking about these like close to Post Farm. And so the chapter really looks at where are there unique and rare habitats for special species or species of concern? Where are there already protected lands, and what land near those large contiguous swaths of open space or kind of special natural resources, what's developable and not currently protected? And also an important goal identified in this chapter and in the open space and rec plan is the importance of our water resources in Lenox, particularly the drinking water resource. So making sure we're actively protecting that through landscape management, but also how can we augment kind of water resources? So that's open space and rec in a nutshell. And are there any questions or comments on this chapter? Okay, great. I will move on. So historical and cultural resources. So often you'll see these chapters separated into 2 distinct chapters, but kind of in Lenox, they're so intertwined. There's such an abundance of historical resources and sites in the community. These range from the great estates to, the old municipal buildings, such as the library, to even the historic resources housed in the library, in the archives. The town is just really fortunate to have such a rich history, but then it's also worked really hard over time to kind of identify and collect and preserve these resources. And thinking about culture, Lenox really is synonymous with culture in the area. If you look at a list of the top attractions in the Berkshires, many of them are in Lenox. So thinking about Shakespeare and Company, the Mount, obviously Tanglewood, the Frelinghuysen Morris House and Studio, Benford Hall, that concentration of creative and cultural businesses in the village center. All of these are so important to the community. We have our cultural district, we have a local historic district. So it's really working to get, and also we have a fairly recent, I think it was finished in 2018, a community-wide historic preservation plan that really dives into the extent of all of these resources and the importance of identifying Lenox kind of as a heritage landscape and community, and really working to promote all of these as an impetus for attracting visitors, but also residents. So the goals in this chapter, really the priority topics were increasing collaboration between the town, but also the various stakeholders, integration with other amenities. So making sure if somebody is in town for an event at Shakespeare and Company, they're also going to go see the Mount or Benford Hall. They're also going to come into the village center and shop and eat there and stay in Lenox. And making sure that as we're redeveloping sites, that we're doing so in a way that's sensitive to the historic significance of the building or site or neighborhood, but that also is supportive of that new investment and potential new use for economic development. So priority goals include using municipal tools and resources to ensure the continued success of the town's historical and cultural economy. Again, really helping that integration happen between the resources and our other amenities, promoting adaptive reuse, and positioning Lenox as a destination for cultural workers. And yeah, so some examples of actions that the town hopes to pursue based on this chapter included really helping kind of these cultural institutions with their really large and aged campuses, helping them have greater flexibility in how they can continue to reuse the sites sustainably, or helping make sure could Lenox have its own shuttle that would bring people kind of around town. They could park their car in one place and just kind of get ferried around. This would reduce traffic in peak season, and it would help people not just get to one destination, but get to many destinations. So happy to take any questions or comments on this topic. And I'll say too, this whole, this sector was really impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. But we had convening with some of the stakeholders was really interesting because, yeah, they all, they either didn't open or they opened to a very curtailed season and program, but they all talked about pivoting to virtual programming and activities. And they also all talked about how sensitive they were to how their activities, how deeply they impact Lenox as a community. So thinking about the overall health and wellness and safety of Lenox when they're thinking about the future and how they'll come back to a normal season, but also thinking about how important they are to the local economy. And so things we'll be tracking to monitor kind of pandemic recovery will be visitorship and sales. And I'll say too, for open space and recreation, when we talked about the pandemic and its impacts, really what we heard from stakeholders was just increased use and visitorship to the open space amenities, but also kind of hand in hand with that, as more people were getting out and using the public spaces and trails, they saw a really big increase in fundraising. As more and more people were just like, we need nature, we need to be out in it, like they felt more supportive and wanted to keep supporting the work that BNRC and Mass Audubon and the local land trust have done to kind of open up these spaces for recreation. And so the hope for historical and cultural resources is that the town will really continue to preserve and promote its historical and cultural resources, which enrich the quality of life for residents and visitors. Yeah, so that's, and I think there's been so much work happening with the cultural district, and then with the town too, for instance, creating a history librarian position in the library. Just all of these things, and Lenox has a very active historical society. So, and then the Historical Commission has really promoted things like a demolition delay bylaw. And the estate preservation bylaw too goes a long way in encouraging economic development and balancing historic preservation, but can it be a little more flexible to encourage a broader range of uses that somebody can use a historic estate and campus for. All right, so not everyone might find this topic as interesting as, say, a town planner, but this is services and facilities.
This is one of my favorite topics, Gwen.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
I love this topic.
a town planner or an elected official. So services and facilities really looks at what municipal services is a community offering? What challenge, like, okay, what is making it hard to offer those services? And how can we make sure that they're going to be sustainable and top-notch into the future? And also looking at our facilities, there's a map in the plan in this chapter, and just the array of property that Lenox owns is really, it's a big list, and many of the facilities are old. So I'll just jump into the vision here. So Lenox hopes to keep providing and improving its high quality and accessible services to all residents, no matter income level and need. And the town remains committed to ensuring that Lenox children receive fair and equitable access to educational opportunities, that there's ample opportunity for community and social engagement, and that they're frequent and accessible to residents of all ages, and that we're maintaining town-owned properties, they're accessible, and they're operated in a way that are fiscally and environmentally sustainable. So it's really thinking about, and this came out in the demographic chapter, and it came out in the economic development chapter, but Lenox really prides itself on its high quality services, especially its school district. So it's making sure no matter what happens to the population, what happens to the broader regional economy, that you are in a position to maintain this excellent educational service that's offered to all residents. And so Lenox is a green community, and it really wants to position itself to pursue environmental sustainability in all avenues, but particularly in how it's building and maintaining its facilities, such as a new wastewater treatment plant, which will need replacing, and how we're looking at, fleet vehicles and how the town is contributing to carbon emissions, or how we're trying to mitigate the carbon that we do emit. And really being proactive in capital improvement planning and thinking about here's our list of old town buildings. Which buildings need which improvements or work today, which can wait, you know, what are short-term, long-term, kind of midterm needs, and making sure that we're being really proactive and that things aren't getting shuffled or kind of redirected due to short-term impacts.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna like interject here really
Please
quickly.
do.
Given that we have so many historic properties, you know, like the library and town hall, we've got a community center that's lovely and large, but you know, has some issues. There are a lot of considerations that really are going to go into this services and facilities topic. And so it would be really great to have as much participation as possible from the public to help us, you know, decide on, you know, what are important short-term, medium-term, and long-term considerations for a lot of these buildings. So just putting that out there.
Yeah, thank you, Mary Beth. Yeah, and that will really be the crux of this chapter in the breakout sessions. And I will say too, thinking about how the pandemic impacted municipal services and facilities, when you speak to the different department heads, like everybody had to pivot, well, except public safety, they kind of said, we've just kept doing our job. Pandemic or no pandemic, we offer the same service, same quality of service through it all. But thinking about the library, the community center, town hall, the schools, certainly, everyone had to start doing their jobs differently and figure out how to offer services to residents in a different way than in the past. And kind of a highlight that everyone spoke about was just how they've been, like, everyone has really worked together and been supportive and helping make sure everything kept going as it could. And two, when you like speaking to Department of Public Works and the water department, they really emphasize the importance of into the future, making sure that you're cross-training staff. So if somebody is sick or if you can't all be in the facility together because of capacity and safety concerns, that like every staff person has the right licenses or experience to do the work that another person would normally do. And also working with our neighboring towns. So could a Lenox worker help, you know, Lee DPW or Lee Water in case their crew was understaffed or vice versa due to kind of health or natural issues. And this came up a lot too. The town recently did a municipal vulnerability preparedness planning exercise. So we also looked a lot at municipal services and facilities through that lens in terms of emergency preparedness and like how would we be impacted by something like a natural disaster or even something more long-term and gradual like climate change. So are there any specific questions or topic or comments for this topic?
Gwen, I would just throw in that when we talk about town services, that does include water supply, and that's addressed in this chapter, and I think will be good to discuss in the breakout. But I think that with, you know, global climate change coming upon us, that understanding the capabilities of our water, our municipal water supply, and then linking it to, like we just talked about, when we had more residents come up here during the pandemic and we saw how our water usage changed, just really watching, you know, that aspect of municipal services as it relates to climate change will be something that's not important, not only in the next 10 to 20 years of this plan, but beyond. So it's a really interesting topic.
Yeah, thank you, Pam. Yeah, so for those who don't know, most of Lenox, the water supply comes from the root reservoirs on Lenox Mountain. And in very dry years, the town does get some water from the city of Pittsfield. And one potential impact of climate change will be kind of longer, hotter summers and not as much snowfall. So that will impact like your overall water accumulation over the year. So we will, like, the water department keeps a close eye on it now, but in the future it will be really important too. And then transportation. So transportation really looks at how people get around the community now, kind of what are transportation gaps. And we're not just talking about cars, we're talking about walking and biking as well. And so Lenox has a really strong transportation system. It has very high quality roads. It has, for I think a town of its size and kind of like, you know, the dense neighborhoods are very concentrated. There's still a lot of sidewalk and kind of off-road walking opportunity. And it is serviced by public transit, the BRTA. And one of the most important goals that came out of this plan has really been to help promote the increased availability of public transit, not just in Lenox, but in the region. So being supportive of efforts to expand train access to and from the Berkshires. And in that vein too, it's thinking about, well, you might have increased train service to the intermodal center in Pittsfield, but once you're there, how can you easily get to Lenox? If you don't have your own car or like family to pick you up, we still want, excuse me. How can you still get to Lenox and to all of the great things that you can do and see in Lenox? So one thing, Lenox is a complete streets community. So we have a complete streets plan. I believe it was completed in 2017, but we have a really good handle on where we have sidewalk gaps. We have a really good handle on what we call bike competency. So where are our roads and streets that the width, the speed limit, where do those really promote bike, like, you know, actually designated bike lanes, and that we want to encourage as a safe bike route. Safety and maintenance is really important. We want the roads to be safe for every user. And again, that access to transit. So yeah, and also for transportation, you've probably, like we've done, the town's been really active and it's been very proactive to keep these the high quality and to keep improving them. I think most recently, the project on Walker Street to connect Lenoxdale up to Route 7 with sidewalk and marked bike lanes. That was a really great, that filled a big sidewalk gap. And then some work done on Main Street to put in raised crosswalks and kind of curb extensions to make it safer for pedestrians. And we also think about, you know, parking capacity in the village center. And then I think especially this year, since so many people have been getting outside and either off trail, on trail, on the road for recreation, how can we really strengthen these pedestrian and bike connections? And I'm thinking about if BNRC will be working on their high road and implementing that, how can people get from the village center to those trailheads? Or how can you get from the top of Lenox Mountain down to Tanglewood, things like that. And obviously our shared use path is a big component of that. And we hope it would have kind of spurs that would connect from the main alignment up to the different neighborhoods. So are there any questions about transportation? Okay. So our final kind of topic is implementation. And for the implementation topic, we're really looking at what are the community's priorities? We've already named ours, but do you agree? Thinking about timeline, are these short-term, midterm, or long-term things that need to happen? Are they municipal actions? If so, is it a policy that needs to be changed? Is it a capital project or expenditure that needs to happen? Is it further planning, just like a feasibility study or a cost benefit analysis that needs to happen, or just helping a developer do a master plan of a site or neighborhood? Or is it a collaboration? You know, the town does a lot and it has different areas of expertise, but there are certainly partners and entities in the Berkshires who do certain things better than we do. Like if you think about our partners in open space and recreation, the town can't do everything. And so how can we work with others to more effectively accomplish some of our goals and visions, or working with our cultural partners and our economic development partners to do these things in a way that benefit everybody. And that's what we'll talk about at our implementation meeting, certainly. And so again, it's what we're asking the community is, do you agree with the priorities? When do you think these things should or need to happen? And what are your ideas for having them happen? So here are our upcoming meetings. And like Mary Beth really emphasized, it's like really important that we have broad community participation. We don't want to create the plan in the vacuum. And we have, I think, some important policy questions kind of in each topic that guidance would be very helpful on. And the Zoom information for each meeting will be posted a day or two in advance on the town calendar. So our next steps, we have the remaining community meetings. We'll be incorporating feedback and comments into the plan. It will then be posted again for additional public comment. We hope to make a brief presentation at a May town meeting, whatever that will look like, if it will be in person or how we'll do it. And then the final presentation for adoption by both the planning board and select board. And I'm happy to take any comments or questions now before we wrap up.
I just want to add really briefly that the next meeting is Monday night, and that'll be the breakout sessions for land use, economic development, and open space and recreation. And you may know people who have some very strong feelings about, economic development in town and, open space and recreation. And so I would encourage, the 4 participants that are on this call, thank you so much for being here today, but really
agreed. Thank you.
Reach out to your friends and say, hey, I was at this cool meeting Saturday morning, and you can watch it on the town website if you want, because I know that there's a previous version that's been recorded that's posted, and I'm sure today's will also be posted. But, to encourage your friends to either watch those and or to read the sections that are posted online of the plan for, say, economic development, and at least tell your friends who are interested in those topic areas to come to that breakout session. We get that it's a lot of time to spend on a lot of different topics, but if there are people that that feel very strongly about some of these issue areas, we would dearly love everyone's participation, at any level. Or if you can't make any of the meetings that we have posted, if you have time to read various sections and then provide your comments to Gwen in writing, that's fantastic too. We encourage you to provide written comments or to come to these meetings. So looking forward to seeing a lot of you at these upcoming meetings. And thank you, Gwen. This has been a really good presentation. I really appreciate all your hard work and the hard work of Berkshire Regional Planning Commission.
Thank you, Mary Beth. Thank you for the steering committee and all of your work. And thank you for everyone who came today. So we will sign off for today. I'm just going to answer Liz's question. I don't think it's on the town website yet, but it is on the CTSB website. So it's Community Television of South Berkshire, CTSB. They were going to post it on their website, and we'll link to that on ours. Okay, I hope everybody has a great weekend. And I will see you all soon.
You too. Thanks, Gwen.